So hello everyone. Welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. My name is Gabriella Gallagher, and I'm the National Chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. We are partners to Peace Now, Shalom Achav, which is Israel's leading peace movement and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us, and if you wish, support us with a donation by going to our website, peacenowcanada.org. We are delighted to have Gidon Bromberg as our guest speaker today. Gidon is the co-founder and Israeli director of Eco Peace Middle East. His organization brings together Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli environmentalists to create shared solutions on water scarcity in the region. Gidon has written extensively on the relationship between water issues and Middle East peace. Our guest moderator is David Brooks, a highly accomplished Canadian researcher on water conservation. David has also written extensively on the importance of water sharing between Israelis and Palestinians. In fact, David and Gidon are colleagues and as well as friends. As always, we welcome your audience questions. Please type these at any time using the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat function for questions. Our webinar today will be recorded and posted to our website. And so without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Gidon to get started. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Gabriella, and thank you, Canadian Friends of Peace Now. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to present the work of EcoPeace Middle East. Just a few more words on the organization. We're in fact the only regional organization that exists that brings together Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians as a single organization. We have a single board made up of an equal number of representatives from each of our three countries. I direct our Israeli operations with another team of about 15 other Israelis out of our office in Tel Aviv, and Nada Majdalani, our Palestinian director, out of Ramallah, another 15 or so staff, and in Amman, Yana Abu Talib, our Jordanian co-director, working with about 20 additional Jordanian staff. And every one of our staff are working as a team on the shared environmental issues that our region faces. And in fact, using the environment as an entry point for peace building and trying to achieve the two-state solution that EcoPeace 2 is very committed to, but even more broadly, trying to promote regional integration in the manner that the region would witness more from a natural perspective, because we can only indeed manage our water resources, our environmental resources, by doing that together. Now, the presentation that I'm about to share and go through, basically, whoops, go to the first slide, is based on a report that at EcoPeace we released late last year, and it's calling for a green blue deal for the Middle East, and it's really inspired by the efforts of both North Americans and Europeans, particularly in the North American case now with the Biden administration in place, the commitment to solve the climate crisis. And the underlying rationale for us at Ecopeace is that the climate crisis is an issue of common concern. It threatens us all, and therefore it requires joint action in order to meet the challenge. And the challenge is very much an issue of survival for our region. Let me see if I can move the slide. So the MENA region, the Middle East, North Africa region, as you can see from the map to the left, is already the most water scarce region in the world. And that's even before the dire impacts of climate change. It's also, as the map on the right shows, one of the most troubled regions in the world as far as ongoing conflicts. Now, there's not a direct relationship between water insecurity and most of the conflicts, but there is an indirect relationship. The water crisis and water scarcity often helps fuel many of the conflicts that we do see in our region. And if we think the situation is today troubling, then when we look at what the models are presenting as to the impacts of man-made, of human-made climate change on our region, then we have really great reason for further concern. So at present, many of you that might have visited the region would be well aware that we have rain. It rains during the autumn months. Many of you know that in the long summer months we don't get rain, but in the autumn and the winter we have. Well, the models are showing us that already by the middle of this century, we will not see any rainfall during the autumn period. And by the end of the century, we're likely to see a 50% increase in the summer period and up to a 40% decline in rainfall, in precipitation. So if we're already the world's most water scarce part of the world, things are going to get a great deal worse because of climate change. Now, it's important to understand that from an environmental perspective, we're one region. The satellite image that I've shared on the screen is a satellite image of the Gaza and Israeli coast. And although it's not directly related to climate change, what I'm trying to highlight in this satellite image is that we can't disconnect. What we're seeing in the red and the yellow is organic matter due to the release of untreated sewage from Gaza. Now, there's lots of reasons why, much of it due to the conflict, but the message here is that when one side fails in its environmental endeavor, and in this case, this is about 110 million liters of raw sewage leaving Gaza. And the currents of the Mediterranean are simply carrying that sewage, not only spoiling and polluting the Gazan coastline, but also the Israeli coastline. And Ecopeace was the organization that actually let the public know that the sewage of Gaza has been intermittently responsible for the closing of Israel's desalination plant just north of Gaza in Ashkelon. And as we'll go into detail later, desalination has become the main source. In fact, 70% of the drinking water of the Israeli population is today coming from desalination. And therefore, the message here is that we can't disengage from our shared environment. If one of our neighbors fail to meet climate resilience, then that has implications for every other neighbor. And that's an important message to bring across, because many Israelis are feeling more confident that Israel has technology, and we'll talk about that more, that maybe makes us more resilient. But if what the message of this satellite image is trying to show is that even if even if in Israel were more resilient to the impacts of climate change, if our neighbors are not, then we also will suffer the consequences. We can also see this in the map of the region, which is sort of the broader region of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. But this is a watershed map, and it's showing it. It's showing the region from the different watershed perspectives. And what it shows, if I look at this watershed, which is the Yarkon watershed, which actually starts in Ramallah and comes all the way to Tel Aviv in the Mediterranean. With climate change, we're going to see a lot more floods. We're already seeing it every winter, a sudden downpour that is not controlled and leads to massive flooding of the coastal areas in particular. And unless we manage all of our watersheds in a manner that's irrespective, that is beyond the border, then we can't really meet the challenges that climate change will bring to our region. The report that we released calling for a green-blue deal for the Middle East is based on earlier work of Ecopeace, and some of it, in fact, this chapter, which is proposing a new water arrangement agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, was actually co-authored by Dr. David Brooks, who's moderating the talk afterwards, together with another French Canadian, Dr. Julia Trottier. But the Green Blue Deal is divided into 4 chapters, very practical suggestions by Ecopeace as to how we can become far more climate resilient to meet the challenges of climate change. And the first chapter that I'll speak about is the chapter that is calling for the need to reach a new agreement on the sharing of natural water between Israelis and Palestinians. Back in 1995, when the Oslo Accords were being negotiated, there was only natural water available. It's before Israel embarked on its large desalination program. It did have some significant investment in the treating of wastewater, but even that was not at its peak. And drinking water was very much based on water from the coastal aquifer shared between Israel and Gaza, the mountain aquifer shared between Israel and the West Bank, or the Jordan River system. And when the Oslo Accords were being negotiated, because there was only natural water, moving towards a fairer share of this natural water between Israelis and Palestinians was difficult to achieve because it would have meant that more water would have been pumped for the benefit of the Palestinian population, but as a result, less water available for the Israeli population. And therefore, water issues were put aside and were decided to be called final status issues that would be resolved together with the other final status issues of Jerusalem, borders, settlements, refugees, etc., that were difficult to be solved, and the arrangement was that they would be solved as a package within a 5-year period. And in the meantime, Israel would enjoy the lion's share, about 75% of the shared waters to be allocated in the interim to Israel, and only 25% of that to be allocated to the Palestinians. And of course, that left the Palestinians in water scarcity. What has happened since, however, is that Israel has heavily invested in desalination, so that, as I said earlier, some 70% of Israel's domestic water supply, what we receive in our towns and cities and in our homes, is coming from these 5 dark blue large desalination plants currently producing just under 600 million cubic meters of water annually by desalinating seawater for the Mediterranean and turning it into drinking water. And as you see, Israel has large plans to further build additional desalination plants, moving from 600 to tripling that quantity by 2050 to 1.8 billion cubic meters annually, with the price of the cost of desalination dropping constantly, being about $2 a cubic meter some 15 years ago, to now only 44 cents US, 44 cents per cubic meter, which in many cases can be cheaper than pumping from a deep aquifer, because that too requires electricity. So that our proposal as part of the Green Blue Deal is that we don't need to tolerate this type of reality that we see in the West Bank. And the middle photo is Gaza, where people have really gone back to the Middle Ages, and they're having to fill up jerry cans for their water supply from very small desalination plants that exist in Gaza. There's no large desalination plants in Gaza. And in the West Bank, you see intermittent water supply where communities, if it's Ramallah, get water twice a week. If it's Bethlehem or it's Hebron, it could be once a month in the summertime. And therefore people are storing water in tanks on their roofs. No one dies of thirst. You can always buy more water by ordering a water tanker, but the cost can be 10 to 20 times more expensive than municipal water. And of course, that's not very affordable for the average Palestinian, certainly not in Gaza especially. And the consequences of holding what we're calling water issues hostage to the broader peace process is also that we're left with lots of sewage, mostly coming from Palestinian cities, but also from some of Israel's settlements like Ariel, that are just flowing untreated into nature and contaminate almost all of the transboundary streams between the West Bank and Israel, or Gaza and Israel flowing in to the Mediterranean. And the bottom line of the call of the Green Blue Deal is that the circumstances under which water was determined to be a final status issue, a difficult issue to solve, are not relevant today, much due to Israel's leadership in the water sector. And therefore, there's no reason to continue to call to solve all of these issues together. And EcoPeace is not alone in this call, but is certainly vocal in the call that it's time to move forward on water first. And in that way, improve the water reality in every Palestinian home, enable greater economic growth, but also enable some trust building to highlight that we have a partner, that we can reach a final agreement on one of the final status issues, and that way highlight that we have a partner also to reach the other final status issues of Jerusalem and borders and so forth. But what's holding us back is this insistence both of the government of Israel, but equally the Palestinian Authority, and much of the international community is stuck on this paradigm of either resolving all of the final status issues or not resolving anything. And as the record has shown us for the last 25 years, we haven't been able to resolve all of the final status issues together, and therefore we haven't moved forward on anything. And given the threat of climate change, that further is likely to lead to further instability, failing to solve the water issues now is likely to increase instability in our region. The second chapter of the Green Blue Deal focuses also on another report undertaken by EcoPeace, supported in this case by the German government through the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and it's also focused on on the water issue, but also on the energy issue. And we try to understand how can we create healthy interdependencies between our three countries, both to meet our climate commitments and, of course, to increase climate resilience. And what our study highlighted was that Jordan, with vast desert areas, has the comparative advantage to produce renewable energy, mostly sun, but also some very good wind, at cheapest prices, and is in a much better position to do so than Israel or the West Bank or Gaza. And the reason that Israel is struggling to meet its current commitments of 30% renewables by 2030 is because the Negev, which looks like it's a vast desert area that could also employ renewables, the fact is it's mostly captured. Half the Negev is military training areas, the other half are declared nature reserves. And according to the Ministry of Energy itself, the Ministry of Energy in Israel is now keen to purchase renewable energy, electricity from Jordan in order to meet Israel's climate commitments. And of course, it's also at cheapest prices. Jordan is today able, because of its vast territory and its cheaper labor costs, it's able to produce renewable energy at under 3 US cents a kilowatt, while at Israel we're at 5.5 cents a kilowatt. And in any event, the renewable today is the cheapest electricity, not only during the daytime, but also including battery storage, because we are so blessed with so much sunshine and the drop in prices, particularly of the photovoltaic materials. And the idea behind the water energy nexus is that Jordan would then have something of value to sell to Israel and to Palestine. We could use, instead of fossil fuel to desalinate on the Mediterranean, to utilize renewable energy, which makes the whole desalination process more sustainable. We still have problems of brine, and we can come to that in question time. But the key environmental problem of desalination is its high energy presently fossil energy usage. And we can desalinate and power the desalination, the existing plants in Israel and the proposed desalination plants in Gaza with renewable energy coming from Jordan, and then sell water back. And that's critical to meet the challenges of climate change, because in that way, we can obtain water security for all three countries. We can obtain energy security with renewable energy as a key component for all three countries. But further, we integrate our economies and we create revenue streams where, the sale of renewable energy from Jordan enables a revenue stream for Jordan to then buy as much water that Jordan needs, because Jordan is in dire water stress, in some areas worse than the West Bank, and will be similar to Gaza if the situation is not properly dealt with because of climate change, because of the Syrian refugee crisis that has hit Jordan. And of course, the desalination further increases the pie in order to make the fair share of natural water more viable. This concept of creating a water energy nexus is built on the experience of Europe. And we thought deeply when undertaking this study as to how can we learn from the coal and steel agreement that was reached, firstly between France and Germany after World War II, thinking that that agreement which forced cooperation in the European continent on the most important natural resources at that time in Europe, being coal and steel, we saw harnessing the sun and harnessing the sea as the coal and steel that's relevant to the Levant and to this century of the climate crisis, so that we're able to advance through a heavy investment in renewables, climate mitigation, and through desalination, climate adaptation. The third chapter of the Green Blue Deal is focused on the Jordan Valley and the rehabilitation of what's left of the Jordan River, particularly in the area south of the Sea of Galilee, down to the Dead Sea. And in the photo on the left, you can see, I think many of you that haven't been to this area, and it's hard to get access to this area because very quickly it becomes the border between Israel and Jordan, and later between the West Bank and Jordan. It's fenced, it's mined, it's out of sight it's, to the general public on all sides. This is what's left of the Jordan River south of the Sea of Galilee. It's 95% of its historical flow has been diverted, half by Israel, the other half by Syria and Jordan. And instead of fresh water, a lot of what's in the river is Israeli, Palestinian, and Jordanian sewage, agricultural runoff, fish farm waste, a very unholy set of waters that's left in a river that's holy to the three Abrahamic faiths, which make up about half of humanity, and with clear consequences on the Dead Sea, which is shrinking largely due to the Jordan River, not only, but largely due to the Jordan River and no longer flowing. And what we see as a result is that not only do we have a devastated river, but we have real pockets of poverty in the Jordan Valley, where income levels, and particularly on the Palestinian and Jordanian sides, are exceptionally low, with climate change, less precipitation, which means less agriculture. We have pockets of 40% unemployment, which is also reflected in 50% youth unemployment, which will only get worse under the current climate scenarios. But we don't have to accept this reality. And at EcoPeace, we undertook a very detailed 5-year study supported by the European Union and presented a master plan for the rehabilitation of the river and the valley. And the result of that study showed that we can rehabilitate the river. We can bring the river into a healthy state, particularly if the additional water resources under a water energy nexus are supplied through using the Jordan River as the natural water carrier, instead of relying on the Israeli national water carrier or the King Abdullah Canal or on dams on both sides of the river. If we can build trust, get more of the sewage or get all of the sewage out of the river, then we can start to use the river itself as the natural water carrier that would then allocate water for the various populations directly from the river itself, and see a far healthier economy that also enables diversified income sources. Because if the river is healthy again, then we can utilize the fact of its holiness to attract much larger pilgrimage, particularly Christian pilgrims that want to see the baptism site of Jesus and other holy sites to Jews, to Christians, and to Muslims together, that are found along the river, but at the moment are not very attractive because the river is in such a demise state. And as our study shows, that we can turn the valley from a valley of poverty of only $4 billion annually to a valley of shared prosperity of $73 billion. Finally, the fourth chapter of the Green Blue Deal is focusing on the need to continue and to increase education, and community-bound efforts. And the photo on the left are youth water trustees, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli, that EcoPeace every year for the last 17 years has been running a program called Good Water Neighbors, which is running in schools and after-school programs where young people are learning about their water reality and their neighbors' water reality. And most recently, we've incorporated, the climate crisis into this education program to understand that we're completely dependent not only on ourselves but also on our neighbors to withstand the implications of the climate crisis. It's the youth leadership that has led to additional leadership, and the photo on the right shows Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli mayors jumping into a clean stretch of the Jordan River. They're jumping into the river not because they're best friends, but they've indeed come to understand, much due to the questions and the advocacy of the youth in their own communities, calling on them to work with the other side, not as a favor, but as a necessity, because no side can clean up the river on its own. It's a shared river, it's the border, and it requires, therefore, cooperation. And the mayors here in events that we take place on a regular basis are showing common effort, again, not because they're best friends. The conflict continues, animosity continues. In fact, the next day, any one of these mayors knows that they'll be condemned by part of their own community for daring to sort of work with the enemy. And the mayors are in fact empowered to stand up and defend themselves and come and say, no, we're in fact working very much for the benefit of our own community. We need to lift our community out of poverty, and we can only do that by rehabilitating the river, and that requires cooperation, so that we're the most loyal of any resident to each of our national countries. So our Green Blue Deal really calls on our governments to increase the expenditure, not just to EcoPeace, but to put climate and environmental education into a compulsory part of the curriculum, both formally and informally, so that we can better educate our respective populations. The way that we're moving forward on the Green Blue Deal is to try to create the needed political will. This is the photo on the left. This is Nada, the Palestinian director, Yana, the Jordanian director, and myself as the Israeli director, invited by the then president of the UN Security Council. And we had the opportunity to actually present much of this work before the UN Security Council. And quite amazingly, at the end of our presentation, both the Palestinian and Israeli ambassadors to the Security Council were able to respond with a thank you. And almost all the other ambassadors to the Security Council fell on the floor because that is so uncommon to see a sort of agreement of the two ambassadors to the UN Security Council. We're trying to create a coalition of the willing, and the photo here on the right is with the current Foreign Minister of Finland, who actually spoke at our annual conference and is willing, announced his willingness to try and champion this effort and bring on board the foreign ministers of our own governments and hold a roundtable that would help start a dialogue between our governments and the need to work to increase climate resilience, and we're looking to create a coalition of the willing. And we've reached out to the Canadian government. We've met myself with the Canadian Embassy in Israel, and Nada with the representative office in Ramallah, and Yana with the embassy in Amman, to ask the Canadian government to join this coalition of the willing, a coalition of foreign ministers. And I must say that we received a positive response, including a positive response of interest, not actually a decision to join yet. And we most recently reached out to one of the Jewish former Israeli or Israeli Canadian members of parliament, and she also spoke positively of trying to convince the foreign minister of Canada to come on board and support this effort that would promote the two-state solution and sort of climate resilience through the climate issues that we jointly face. So let me leave it for there and turn it to David for some questions and moderation. So over to you, Dr. David Brooks.
Well, thank you for that, Gidon. It's covered many things. I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions, so I think we probably have to both be pretty limited in what we ask and what we say. I believe there isn't a person in the world who has access to the web who doesn't realize that Israel has gone through a number of elections. Almost none of that election talk involved climate change. I don't hear of it as an issue. How do you think the Green-Blue deal is going to be picked up by a government that doesn't seem to realize that climate change is a problem?
So although the issue, unfortunately, has not been a major, and it's received some attention from the political discussions, but certainly has not been an election issue. What I think is perhaps unique to the Middle East, or certainly to the situation in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, is that there's very few climate deniers, that there is actually a consensus that climate change is real and is a threat to the stability of the region. The difference is that for the Israeli public, there's a sense that we're going to be okay, that Israel has the technology, mostly desalination, Israel's leadership in treating sewage water, that we're going to be okay as far as the water issues go. But that there's our role at Ecopeace, and the purpose of the Green-Blue deal is to highlight that in fact we can't survive well alone. That if one of our neighbors, any of our neighbors, fail, that has consequences, just as the Syrian uprising, which was partly fueled by the climate crisis, not the only, but partly fueled, had significant consequences for all of the other neighbors, particularly in the refugee plight. So although the issue has not been an issue in the election campaigns, interestingly enough, I think anyone that's followed the words of Gilad Erdan, Israel's recently newly appointed ambassador to Washington, D.C., one of the first things he says is that Israel will join the Biden administration in fighting climate change. So there is a desire for Israel to be a leader in this field, and we see that as the opportunity to promote regional cooperation, to not only market Israeli technology, which is perhaps what many in the Israeli business community are interested in, but as a means to advance the two-state solution, as a means to advance regional cooperation and integration in the water sector.
Let me just ask one more question then, and it's almost the same question. And I shouldn't be asking you. I know I should be asking your co-director, but you're the one I have. What is the response of the Palestinian Authority? And particularly, I know Gaza is a more desperate situation, but if you could focus on the West Bank, where there is, in many cases, not an ample, but comparable to Israel, there, some good and some bad sources of water.
So at the release with the release of the report, we had speakers from the three sides, and the Palestinian speaker was Dr. Shaddad Attili, who was the former Minister of Water for the Palestinian Authority and is currently in charge of the negotiations unit on water issues for the PLO. And so he will ostensibly be leading water negotiations for the PLO on water issues with Israel. And he came out very strongly as a champion to this issue, saying that he believes that the Palestinian Authority should indeed agree to moving forward on water issues first, not because the other final status issues are not important, but highlighting how the climate crisis will further lead to instability if we allow water to continue to be held hostage in the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. So we've seen, at least from Shaddad Attili, and Nada would also speak to, for the first time, some of the real water advisors and thinkers on the Palestinian side, who in the past had not been supportive of the idea of moving first on water, are now in fact calling for resolving water issues as soon as possible. And that's partly due to the fact that we're all feeling the impact of climate change already in our region.
Gabby, I think I should turn the message to you. You have the questions coming in from the public, so let me step back.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. So yes, we have a wide range of questions. I'm going to put two here together because they're both about the desalination. One's from Shelley Corin. Has Israel managed to include all the trace elements that natural water has into the desalinated water? And a totally different question is about the brine. Is there a lot of brine being dumped into this person says there are massive quantities of brine ending up in the Mediterranean Sea, and what's the ecological impact?
So firstly, as any environmental organization, at Ecopeace, we think that desalination should be the last choice and not the first choice. That you really need to try and get everything else right. You need to price water in a way that encourages conservation. You need to maximize the collection and the treatment and then the reuse of sewage. You need to reduce water loss to as little as possible. You need to promote through the pricing of water for agriculture conservation, so that you're not growing bananas and other water guzzling plants. So in the case of Israel, although Israel can always improve, it's doing a damn good job. It's probably it is indeed a world leader in the water field, and without moving forward on desalination, we would have intermittent water supply in Israel, as we currently see in West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, and in fact the whole Middle East. Every country in the Middle East is not supplying water 24/7. That means that there's pipes, but water is not flowing in those pipes 24/7. The reason that water flows in the pipes in Israel 24/7 is today much due to that investment in desalination. So firstly, desalination is the last choice. But we're at a stage in Israel and in the region where we no longer have a choice. If we don't invest in desalination, and we think powered not through fossil but through renewable energy, then we're going to see real impacts on people's welfare and people's ability to live here in the future. Nevertheless, there are negative implications. One of them is that we don't have all of the natural minerals that we find in ground and surface water in desalinated water. One of the minerals missing is magnesium. Now, there's a debate going on whether Israel should add magnesium into the water. At the moment, it's not adding. The water authority is not wanting to pay for that extra cost, and the health ministry is saying that people can get that magnesium from other sources. So there's a debate going on. It's not fully resolved, and there are some really important environmental organizations in Israel that are advocating to add that magnesium that's missing from the desalinated water. The brine is the most negative environmental impact of the whole desalination process, particularly the accumulated impact. So, one desalination plant will not have, will have a very point source impact. But when you have many desalination plants being built, not only in Israel, but also in Egypt, in Cyprus, in Greece, in Turkey, in Lebanon, the whole Eastern Mediterranean is planning to heavily invest in desalination. And that means an accumulated amount of bromide that indeed could have negative impacts on the Eastern Mediterranean. This needs further research, more investment, and I think that's our main call, because we need to find a way to make the brine a valuable resource, rather than just the brine is the salts that have been removed from the desalination process, rather than dumping it back into the Mediterranean. If we can turn it through research into a valuable resource, like wastewater was in the past just dumped, today in Israel, farmers fight basically over that treated wastewater because they're using it instead of fresh water to grow about half of Israel's agriculture. So that's our currently call on the brine, is the need to invest in more research so that we can stop dumping it and see it as a valuable resource for perhaps building material or other resources, other purposes.
Right. So there are so many questions, but I want to make sure we don't miss this one. And a few people have asked, how can people outside the region support the work of EcoPeace other than through donations? Obviously, donations are always welcome by every organization, but what else can people do?
Absolutely. So I think firstly, I don't know whether we've shared the Green Blue Deal report. Yes, I think it's already been shared on the chat, or if not, we can certainly pass that on. It's on the front page. Also, there's a link to it on our website. I think it's important to educate yourself on these issues, and then use that. And we are looking for partners, including with Canadian Friends of Peace now, as to how to help create that political will to get the government of Canada fully supportive of a green blue deal for the Middle East. Firstly, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, but it can also very much involve the broader Middle East as well. So that the foreign minister of Canada, and I'm not sure whether that's how you call your foreign minister, the Americans call it the Secretary of State, but if the Canadian foreign minister can endorse a green blue deal and work currently with the foreign minister of Finland, that has already gone out there and is championing the green blue deal, that would be really helpful So speaking to your member of parliament, highlighting that Canada can play a real role in helping to solve the water crisis, helping to build climate resilience, and work towards Middle East peace efforts. And anyone can reach out to EcoPeace directly, and we can really work together on gaining the support of the Canadian government for this effort.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or possibly two questions. One is, and these are questions that are all over the place. Is Netanyahu trying to prevent water moving from Israel to Jordan?
I think it's very unfortunate that we've all read the report in the media that Jordan has requested to buy. So we also need to clarify, as part of the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, Israel is committed to transferring, not to selling, to transferring 55 million cubic meters of water from the Jordan River system, in this case from the Sea of Galilee, to Jordan as part of Jordan's share to the Jordan River system. And Israel supplies that. There has not been any year where Israel has not met its peace treaty commitments of water. But in addition to that, Israel has sold additional quantities, generally quite small amounts, 5 to 10, 20 million cubic meters, additional amounts to Jordan according to the particular need. And as we read in the media, Jordan recently requested to buy some additional water from Israel, pumped from the Sea of Galilee. And I think the situation is that not that Netanyahu has refused, but he's delayed the response. We've seen some unfortunate diplomacy going from both sides, delaying various issues from the Jordanian side, from the Israeli side. We really think that, again, the Green-Blue deal and understanding the climate challenge that we face would help our leaders understand that we can't play these games anymore. That these issues are too critical, and as the Israeli Water Authority, as the Israeli security establishment have said, water stability in Jordan, it really amounts to the national security or the national stability of Jordan, and Jordan's national stability is very much a national security interest of Israel. So let's not play around the bush here. No one's doing a favor. Israel has a self-interest in selling more water, in helping Jordan meet its water needs in order to maintain stability. We think the way to do that, however, is also to buy electricity, renewable electricity from Jordan. And we see the current Minister of Energy in Israel, Minister Steinitz, in fact, being very open to that. And most recently, in conversations that we've had at EcoPeace with the Ministry of Energy, we see a real change in policy, where Israel is eager not only to buy a small amount, but to really meet its climate challenge, its climate commitments to the Paris Accords by increasing solar. So we see the water energy aspect of the Green-Blue deal as a way to create healthy interdependencies between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so many good questions, but we're rapidly running out of time. I'm afraid we have to end at 1 o'clock sharp. I wonder, I would like to offer David Brooks the opportunity to either ask one last question or make a comment, and then I'll have to wrap it up and say goodbye. Maybe some of these questions we can send to our guests, and maybe they'll be willing to send some email answers. because of
Thank you, Gabby. I'll say what got me excited about working with EcoPeace Middle East, was that Middle East at the end of it. I have worked in the environmental movement in Canada almost since I arrived in Canada some 50 odd years ago from the United States. Um, the I have never known a more politically active and politically effective group than EcoPeace as an environmental NGO. And I will just leave that last line there. They really do work politically, and they're effective politically. So congratulations to you, Gidon and Nada, and who have I left out of?
Yana.
Yana. All three of you do wonderful work.
Thank you, David. And I think what's unique about it is that it is because we're a single organization, we've worked out a single strategy, but then it's Israelis speaking to Israelis and arguing the case as Israelis for cooperation, Palestinians in Arabic to Palestinians arguing the case for cooperation on the environmental issues, and Jordanians in Arabic to Jordanians, and together to the international community. So together, we've had a conversation, with foreign ministries, and would like to hold a conversation with the Canadian Foreign Ministry. We've had separate conversations with the different Canadian ambassadors. We're hoping to have a conversation of the three directors, Nada, Yana, and myself, with the Canadian Foreign Ministry in Ottawa, and see whether the Canadian Foreign Minister would agree. And that's where I think so much of the public and the audience here could help us. Also by subscribing to our newsletter, which I think is also, you can do it just through coming onto our website, so that you're constantly updated on the advances of this effort, which is so linked with the work of Canadians for Peace Now, because the two-state solution is very much inherent to the objectives also of the Green Blue Deal.
Well, this has been a wonderful presentation and discussion. I'm sorry to say our time is up. Thank you so much, Gidon, for your excellent and thought-provoking presentation. Thank you, David, for your very pertinent questions, and to all the members of the audience for being there. Please do visit our website, peacenowcanada.org, to learn more about us as well. And please consider a donation, because we count entirely on the support of people like you. And stay tuned for more great webinars. Take care and be well, and goodbye. Thanks.